Good afternoon. It's Sunday, the 18th of December. I'm Laura Cornfield, and this is IBA News broadcasting live from Jerusalem. After 5 years in prison, it appears that convicted rapist and former President Moshe Katsav is going home. The prison's parole board today accepted Katsav's request for early release after serving over 2/3 of his 7-year jail term. The release will now be delayed by 1 week to allow the state to appeal. In its ruling, the parole board acknowledged that it had observed seeds of repentance in Katsav, who has maintained his innocence throughout his incarceration. Members of the board said they have no doubt that Katsav, who was convicted of 2 counts of rape and a series of other sexual offenses, had undergone a dramatic change during his time in prison. Until his original release date in 2 years' time, the 72-year-old Katsav will have to abide by a number of regulations. Among them, he will not be permitted to leave the country. He will have a 10 p.m. curfew and remain at home until 6 a.m. and will not be able to give any media interviews. Katsav's lawyers claim their client underwent a complete rehabilitation process, including months of therapy, and hailed the decision as the best thing that could happen. Katsav's lead attorney, Tzion Amir, told reporters outside the Masyau prison that upon hearing of the decision, the 72-year-old Katsav broke down in tears. He said it was an extremely emotional day that brings an end to a decade-long journey. Amir said he doesn't expect the state will appeal the decision. A short time ago, residents of the illegal outpost of Amona announced they were accepting the revised government compromise offered over the weekend and said they will not resist the slated evacuation. As the deadline for the court-ordered evacuation of the illegal outpost draws near, the government presented residents with a revised compromise that would relocate 24 families to nearby plots instead of just 12. 45 residents voted in favor of the deal, while 25 opposed it. Residents said that if the government strays from its compromise, they will not hesitate to renew their campaign and fight for what they called their rights. Speaking at the start of today's cabinet meeting, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called on the residents to take the deal, adding that no other government has shown more concern for settlement in the land of Israel. Accepting this would be the right decision for them, for settlement for the entire state of Israel. Meanwhile, a group of youth assaulted Housing Minister Yoav Gallant and tried to prevent him from entering Amona this morning, shouting no to agreements and the land of Israel is not for sale. They rocked his vehicle and pelted it with eggs. Gallant was surrounded by bodyguards and accompanied by MK Moti Yogev and head of the Benjamin Regional Council, Avi Roeh. Gallant, wearing a kippah on his head, dismissed the rabble, saying it was like pebbles hitting a tank. During his visit to the outpost, Gallant met with residents and told them that Israel was determined to uphold the Supreme Court rulings. He also told them that a way would be found to build a stronger Amona nearby. However, lawyers for the NGO Yesh Din say they are in touch with a Palestinian who claims to own so-called abandoned Plot 38, the alternative plot where residents have been offered to settle. If true, this could torpedo the government compromise. 12 soldiers of the Givati Brigade deployed in the area of Ofra in Judea and Samaria near the Amona outpost returned to their base last night after receiving assurances from their commanders that they will not participate in the actual evacuation. Earlier, the soldiers abandoned their posts, saying they refused to participate in the removal of settlers from the illegal outpost. After their commanders emphasized the seriousness of their actions, assuring them their job would be to secure the outer perimeter during the evacuation, the soldiers agreed to return to their posts. A statement released by the IDF spokesman said, as the army of a democratic state, the IDF will continue to carry out missions according to the instructions of the political echelon, adding the army applies a zero-tolerance policy to soldiers refusing to obey orders. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu is preparing to take harsher measures against illegal construction in the Arab sector. Last night, Netanyahu instructed Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan to move forward with a plan to intensify enforcement measures against illegal building, including the demolition of illegally built structures in Arab areas in the center and south of the country, as well as the Jerusalem area. The Prime Minister's Bureau said that Netanyahu is determined to enforce the law against illegal building equally in both the Arab and Jewish sectors. Prior to his directive, Netanyahu released a video on Friday addressing residents of Amona in which he urged them to act responsibly during the slated evacuation. At the same time, the Prime Minister assured the residents he will make sure to speed up the demolition of illegally built Arab structures across the country to show that law is implemented equally. Netanyahu's linkage of the Amona evacuation to illegal construction in the Arab sector was harshly criticized by the opposition. Speaking at a cultural event in Tel Aviv on Saturday, Zionist Union leader Isaac Herzog called Netanyahu's attempts to cheap demagoguery and incitement with the aim of ignoring reality. Hamas is blaming Israel for the assassination of Mohammad Zawahiri, its drone expert in Tunisia, who was also reportedly manufacturing remote-control submarines for the terrorist organization. Israel remains mum, neither confirming or denying the report. We get more in this report from IBA's Margot Dudkevich.
Aviation engineer Mohammad Zawahiri was assassinated outside his family's home in Sfax, Tunisia on Thursday, shot a number of times at close range while he sat in his car. Arab media reports immediately suggested Israel was responsible for his demise, the work of Israel's intelligence agency, the Mossad. Other reports suggested his death was criminally motivated. Minister Tzachi Hanegbi declared Israel has no connection to Zawahiri's death. 48-year-old Zawahiri, a Tunisian national and a former pilot for the country's national carrier, was head of a civil aviation organization. His expertise, building drones. He had reportedly arrived in Tunisia a few days earlier on a family visit. Media reports out of Tunisia said the authorities had arrested a number of suspects, including 8 Tunisian nationals. They said a woman wearing a hijab posing as a journalist who interviewed him just hours before the attack was arrested as she headed for the airport along with her cameraman. In addition, 4 rental vehicles believed to have been used by the assailants were tracked down and seized, as well as 2 handguns with silencers. Hours after the attack, the Hamas military wing Izzeddin al-Qassam admitted that Zawahiri had worked with the terrorist organization for some 10 years, building and manufacturing drones. They said his work resulted in a number of Hamas victories during Operation Protective Edge in 2014. Margot Dudkevich, IBA News.
It's been cleared for publication today that the Shin Bet Security Service has arrested 3 Palestinian residents of Samaria who confessed to setting several of last month's fires as an act of terror with a nationalistic motive. The 3, aged 19 to 24, were arrested 3 weeks ago after they were caught on tape by surveillance cameras as they committed arson. Their files have been passed on to the military prosecution. Jewish home MK Nisan Slomiansky, who's been accused of a series of sexual offenses against women, has decided to suspend himself from the Knesset's Constitution, Law and Justice Committee, which he chairs. In announcing his decision to the Knesset's legal advisor, Slomiansky said that while he is well aware of the weight of responsibility inherent in his position, he feels it is the right thing to do in order to enable a proper investigation of the allegations. Slomiansky added that he felt deep sorrow if his behavior was interpreted differently than he intended. He said that if he had known who the accusers were, he would have personally issued a sincere apology. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's announcement that he is nominating bankruptcy attorney David Friedman as the next U.S. ambassador to Israel was received with mixed feelings in Jerusalem and Ramallah. Advocacy group J Street said it vehemently opposes Trump's choice, calling Friedman a right-wing settlement booster. Unnamed Palestinian officials say the decision marks substantial changes in America's position toward the Palestinian people and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The 58-year-old Friedman, an Orthodox Jew from Long Island, has no diplomatic experience, but is a staunch supporter of the settlement industry in Israel, and on receiving the nomination, said he looks forward to taking up his post in Jerusalem, suggesting that Trump intends to act on his word and move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Israel's capital city, a move that is likely to draw the wrath of the Arab world.
Trump administration will never pressure Israel into a two-state solution or any other solution that is against the wishes of the Israeli people.
The incoming ambassador's position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict represents a major change of approach from the long-held U.S. support for the two-state solution, as we see in this report from CNN.
In tapping his longtime friend and bankruptcy lawyer David Friedman as his ambassador to Israel, Donald Trump moved to make good on a campaign promise.
We will send a clear signal that there is no daylight between America and our most reliable ally, the State of Israel.
Israel's right-wing education minister, Naftali Bennett, praised Friedman, calling him a, quote, great friend of Israel. By appointing the hardline Friedman as ambassador, Trump could be signaling plans to reverse decades of U.S. policy towards Israel. Friedman, an Orthodox Jew, has no experience in diplomacy. He strongly supports legalizing settlements and Israel annexing the West Bank, and has questioned the need for a Palestinian state, writing that a two-state solution appears, quote, impossible, as long as the Palestinians are unwilling to renounce violence against Israel or recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state.
I'm reminded of the line from Wizard of Oz when Dorothy lands and says to her little dog Toto, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. The issue is the positions that have been attributed to him on issues like two-state solution, settlement activity, that clearly contradict decades of U.S. foreign policy.
We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem.
In a statement, Friedman said he looked forward to doing his job, quote, from the U.S. Embassy in Israel's eternal capital, Jerusalem, echoing his promise to Israelis in Jerusalem in October.
The law provides that the obligation to move the embassy to Jerusalem can be waived at the desire of the State Department. The reaction from Donald Trump is going to be, you know what, guys, you're all fired.
For decades, U.S. presidents have argued the status of Jerusalem, which both Israelis and Palestinians see as their rightful capital, can only be settled as part of a peace deal. Friedman has criticized the left-leaning Jewish lobby J Street, which has criticized some Israeli policies, calling them, quote, far worse than capos, Jews who turned in their fellow Jews in the Nazi death camps. Asked to respond to those comments, Friedman said, quote, they're not Jewish and they're not pro-Israel. In a statement, the group that supports a two-state solution for Israelis and Palestinians said it was, quote, vehemently opposed to Friedman's nomination, calling it reckless and putting America's reputation in the region and credibility around the world at risk.
Friedman was in Israel just days before the U.S. election, where he came to speak at a pro-Trump rally. Here's a short excerpt from his interview with Israel Television's Yaakov Achimeir.
Look what she did as Secretary of State when she ripped up the letter that George Bush gave to Ariel Sharon, referring to the obsolescence of the 1949 armistice lines. If you look at the pressure she put on Israel in 2009 to freeze all settlement building without any concessions whatsoever from the Palestinians. The lifers in the State Department are absolutely, positively committed to never moving the embassy to Jerusalem. What's different about Donald Trump? You all know Donald Trump. If there's anybody in the world of politics who could stand up to the State Department, it is Donald Trump. When Donald Trump has his first meeting with the lifers in the State Department, and they're going to say, well, you know, Mr. Trump, with all due respect, you know, you've only been president for a couple of days. We've been living here for the last 20 years, and we don't do it that way. We do it this way. You know, we don't move the embassy. That's been the State Department policy for 20 years. The reaction from Donald Trump is going to be, you know what, guys, you're all fired.
Outgoing United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon singled out Israel once again, urging Israeli lawmakers to reconsider advancing the regulations bill, which he says will legalize Jewish settlements built on private Palestinian land in Judea and Samaria. In his final briefing on the Middle East Friday, Ban took Israel to task for approving the bill in the preliminary hearing earlier this month, warning if such a legislation is passed, it will have negative consequences for Israel. In order for the bill to become law, it is required to pass 3 more readings in the Knesset.
A bill currently being debated in the Israeli legislature risks the regularization of more than 50 outposts and thousands of housing units built on private Palestinian land in the West Bank, a clear violation of international law. If adopted, this legislation would for the first time apply Israeli law on the status of Palestinian land in the occupied West Bank. I strongly urge legislators to reconsider advancing this bill, which will have negative legal consequences for Israel and substantially diminish the chances for Arab-Israeli peace.
At the same time, the UN Secretary General also admitted that the world body has acted in bias against Israel, saying decades of political maneuvering resulted in a disproportionate number of resolutions and reports against the Jewish state, adding such behavior has prevented the UN from fulfilling its role effectively. The United Nations Security Council is expected to vote today on a French resolution that would see the deployment of UN observers to monitor the evacuation of tens of thousands of Syrians still trapped in eastern Aleppo. Meanwhile, the International Committee of the Red Cross says it is ready to resume evacuated wounded civilians in the formerly rebel-held parts of Aleppo as soon as those involved in combat reach an agreement that will provide safety for those being taken out of the city. Today, ICRC and Syrian Red Cross officials dispatched buses to bring out rebels and civilians. This after the evacuation came to a halt on Friday, with civilians being turned away from the buses queuing up to transport them out of the war-torn area. Syrian rebel forces blamed Iran for holding up the evacuation of those trapped in the city and urged Russia to live up to its commitment to ensure a safe passage for those seeking to leave. Speaking to reporters in Washington, U.S. President Barack Obama said Russia, Iran, and the Syrian regime are to blame for the atrocities in Aleppo.
We all know what needs to happen. There needs to be an impartial international observer force in Aleppo that can help coordinate an orderly evacuation through safe corridors. There has to be full access for humanitarian aid, even as the United States continues to be the world's largest donor of humanitarian aid to the Syrian people. And beyond that, there needs to be a broader ceasefire that can serve as the basis for a political rather than a military solution.
A report published by the Anne Frank House Museum in Amsterdam suggests there is no conclusive evidence supporting claims that Anne Frank and her family were betrayed to the Gestapo, saying other scenarios should be considered. Ronald Leopold, executive director of the museum, said Friday the new research raises the possibility that the family was discovered inadvertently by German security forces who were investigating another matter. Until now, the general belief has been that the Germans were tipped off by an anonymous caller, leading to the arrests and subsequent deportation of the Frank and Van Pels families to death camps in August of 1944. The report suggests that German security forces arrived at the building to investigate claims of fraud over ration coupons by 2 salesmen who worked in the building and subsequently uncovered the annex where the families hid. It's Sunday, and in keeping with our weekly tradition, here are 5 good news stories that may give us a cheerful boost to start the week off. Israeli aviation photographer Avichai Socher wins first place in Aviation Week's International Photo Competition. Impressed by Israeli technology, the Czech military is set to purchase 8 Israeli-made Iron Dome radars to the tune of $100 million. Despite much anti-Israel campaigning on U.S. campuses, Israeli and American academic collaboration is at an all-time high. This according to a new report by the Technion Samuel Ne'eman Institute for National Policy Research. More and more homegrown television shows are getting international recognition as Netflix is increasingly adding Israeli television shows and films to its variety menu. Sir Andras Schiff, the Hungarian-born British classical pianist and conductor, is joining the Galilee Orchestra for the annual Christmas concert in Nazareth. In finance, no change in the shekel with currency markets closed for the weekend, and the stock exchange is starting the week up. Here are the numbers. Turning to the weather, rain is expected in the south and center of the country tomorrow, with more snow predicted on Mount Hermon. Here are the highs and lows for the next 24 hours at home and abroad. And that's all for this newscast. Ari O'Sullivan will be here tomorrow. Until then, I'm Laura Cornfield, wishing you a good evening and shalom from Jerusalem.